This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. Hey, it's James Taylor, and welcome to The Creative Life, a show where I talk with some of the most creative entrepreneurs, writers, musicians, artists, and academics. In this episode, I talk to the drummer Gabor Dornyei, and we speak about complexity of language. We talk about finding a platform for the creative work you're doing and this idea of versatility. So let's get into the show. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm excited to have my guest today, Gabor Dornyei. And Gabor is a Hungarian-born, UK-based session drummer, faculty member ICMP London, visiting professor at Swiss Drum Academy, and member of the group Thunder Duo. Gabor's talents as a player and clinician have seen him sharing the stage with fellow drum legends Yo-Yo Mayer, Billy Cobham, Ian Pace, Steve Smith, and Chris Coleman. And recently, Rhythm magazine listed him as one of the 10 best new drummers to watch out for worldwide. So Gabor, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. What an introduction. Thanks very much for having me.
So share with our listeners, what's going on in your world just now?
My world is very, very exciting at the moment because most recently I had a very successful filming in Vancouver, Canada, on Drumeo, at our mutual friends Jared's Folk's studio, which is probably, I can risk to say that they're the number one drumming educational website in the world right now.
That's awesome. Great setup he's got there.
With a huge following, and I'm very, very excited to let you know that in the last 2 weeks, over 220,000 people watched my recent filming, which I consider as a very good reach. And that was the Monday and the Tuesday of the NAMM show in January. And after that, I went down to LA. And at the NAMM show, we launched my first signature product on Tycoon Percussion, which is the Gabor Dornyei drum pack, which is a percussion pack that is based on three main percussion elements that drummers, like drum kit players, use, including a cowbell, mountable tambourine, and a lip block, which gives like really nice extra colors to your playing. So we promoted my signature pack to great success to all the kind of worldwide media and all the magazines, Modern Drummer, and everybody was there. So I was very happy to do that. And after that, I came home and back to my normal life.
And how did you first learn your craft as a drummer? Take us through where it all began, and at what point in your life you said, actually, this is what I want to do for a living. I'm going to be a professional drummer.
Well, it's a very good question. The funny thing is, I don't think I had a choice. The reason why I'm saying that is because nobody ever wanted me to be a drummer, because all my family is very, very highly educated people. You know, my father was a lawyer, my mom is an economist, and my sister is the regional director of Europe's biggest market research company. And so she's in charge for several countries. So nobody ever played music in my family. But my feelings and my kind of inspiration and attraction towards drumming was so strong that once I discovered it, I just literally had no choice. I mean, I so strongly wanted to do it that I was playing like 10, 12 hours a day, you know. So there was no question that this is what I want to do. And that was around when I was 10 years old. And of course, I had no drums and no instruments in our house. So all I did was I was playing on the sofa. And I was just listening to my favorite rock and metal records because I was massively into rock in my childhood. Me and my sister, we were big rockers. So Metallica and Iron Maiden and all those bands were on the record player all the time. And I just bashed along on the sofa bed. So this is how the whole thing started. And then my mom kind of saw me being totally crazy about drumming. I'm just super quickly, I don't want to waste too much time here, but I was so crazy about drumming that when I went to elementary school, we lived really close to the school, literally opposite side of the road. And when we had a long break, which was like a 20-minute break after the third class, that was a kind of early lunch break, I ran home and played 10, 15 minutes of drums in the break. And then I ran back to the school and nobody noticed that I was away. So I was that crazy about drumming.
Wow.
And at a very early age, I mean, that was like 10, 12 years old. I mean, I'd never been a child prodigy, so because nobody wanted me to be a drummer, so it wasn't supported at all from earlier than that. And also I did a lot of sports prior to that. But when I was around 10, 12, drumming came in and just swiped everything out of my life, and I never stopped drumming since then.
And so, around the age of usually like 15, 14, 15, 16, a lot of parents are saying, okay, maybe that if their kids are interested in sports and they're doing music as well, but they maybe say, well, that's great, but what you need to do is you need to go to university and go and get a real job, a real thing first, and then you can maybe do the music on the side. And so you've always got something to fall back on. What was the conversations you were having with your family at that age? And were they okay when you said, actually, I don't necessarily want to go that path?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and I'm not very happy to talk about it because I don't want to paint my mom into any, any negative picture about her. But of course, she was worried, like
sure.
Super worried, and basically, I was kicked out of home. And the reason why I don't want to. I didn't want to say that because what happened was that she said that I cannot possibly do this because we're coming from such a, as I said, highly educated background. A lot of lawyers and everybody's way too clever for a drummer. And basically, she said, I can't do that. And if I want to do that, I have to leave home. Of course, she just wanted me to put on the best possible road that she thought at the time would be the best possible road. So I totally forgive that to her. But basically, so for a couple of months, I had to leave home. And but I told her that if that's the price, then I'm just going to leave home and I'm going to live at a rented place at a friend's house. And that's what I did. And somehow I made my living out of giving private lessons. That was around when I was 16, 17. And then, of course, that she saw that, okay, this guy is crazy about drumming. She had no choice than let me do this, basically. So I had to fight for it. And that thing probably made me even stronger in my decision that this is really what I want to do. And I was just, crazy. And I still am up to this date, crazy about improving myself and just trying to get better. And I'm practicing as much as I can. So I'm down there every day. And I'm just learning constantly.
And then we were talking before we started about you put a lot of practice time into that solo. You mentioned the video that you did with Jared at Drumeo, which is an amazing. So people go into YouTube. We'll put them in the link in the show notes so they can see the video. And you put a lot of time into working on that piece. So let's strip that back. And what I'm interested in is kind of where your musical ideas as a drummer come from, how you start to construct a solo like that. Because looking at it from the outside, and even as I speak as a drummer as well, you're kind of figuring out, well, how did he construct that? Why did he make that decision as to do that thing? So take me through the process of you going through, okay, I've got this thing, the solo piece to do. How do you start to, where does it start and where does it go from?
Well, that's a very good thing, very good question as well, because I'm in a very lucky position that I was never lacking ideas. I'm not entirely sure where they come from, but I always have a lot of ideas. Like, for example, even now that I just did that recording, I already know that what's the next thing that I'm going to work on and what's the next thing I'm going to do. I'm not entirely sure really where these ideas come from, but what I know for sure is I certainly have a concept. Now, my concept is that from the very early age, say 17, 18 years old of age, I was very lucky to be chosen to perform on international drum festivals. And my realization came in a very early stage that I found a lot of drum solos very, very boring because I thought that the drummers were kind of showing off their techniques, and the only difference between several drummers was that who can play faster and maybe who can play louder. And I just thought that musically there's got to be much more into this. We have more to say. And there should be melody, there should be conversation, there should be dynamics, there should be, of course, a lot of virtuosic elements and a lot of musicality, dynamics, expression. There's a lot of jazz, finesse. So a lot of things that I was kind of trying to add to my playing, because as I said earlier, I came from rock. So these were things that I had to learn. And so basically at the early age, around 18, 19, I kind of started opening up towards percussion. Now, percussion is a very interesting thing, because if you develop a high level of independence behind your kit, you are going to be able to play like several elements of a percussion ensemble. So you're not going to sound like a drummer on its own, and then another percussionist maybe adding tambourine or cowbells or whatever on top, but you can play them all together and kind of invite and include all those elements in your playing, and you on your own you sound like a percussion ensemble. And that was my goal, and this is what I started doing. And that's actually a very hard subject, so you have to practice a lot, and you need to have, you know, creative and musical ideas and a lot of independence, because you find yourself playing several people's part at the same time, and for that you need to develop these skills, you know, to be able to focus on more than one thing. Of course, you know, drumming includes a lot of independence anyway. But if you kind of work on that a lot, then you can take it to a really high level, and you can do odd times, you can do different styles, you can do different time signatures at the same time. So I found these things very, very fascinating, and I started working on them, and I carry on, you know, ever since. And basically, so I always try to find a melody, always try to find a musical theme in my solos. So I build around those things, not just kind of jump on the drum kit and trying to play my fastest single stroke roll. So my idea is always coming from music, from a musical pulse, or something that I want to express.
And are you thinking in terms of structures as well, you know, like AABA type of structures when you're putting together something, or is it much more fluid than that?
Either that, or I mean, that's totally possible. Or I'm either thinking in sections, you know, like in say like a beginning, like an opening section, and then a main theme. You introduce the theme, you start adding notes to it, and then taking away, and then you constantly build, and then you let the whole thing drop. So you've got again the build up. So it's like totally like a musical approach, not just like a drumming kind of approach towards the drum solo. I always kind of try to approach my drumming from the side of music rather than technique, because many people kind of play certain elements in order to be able to show this and this technique. Now, I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm using my technique is to be able to express something musically and not the other way around.
So like when I was speaking to a jazz guitarist recently, we were having this conversation about, he was very inspired by another style by another instrument, i.e. piano, and by a certain pianist who would play things, you know, obviously with two hands, but would imply things in what they were playing. So he wouldn't necessarily play time, say on the left hand, but he would imply time in the way that he was comping on the left hand. And this guitarist said that was a big light bulb moment for me, because I could see that you could imply time and you can imply things without actually having to play, you know, 4 to the bar exactly as it was doing. So when you're coming to construct your solos, and you're starting to think more like a percussionist than just a drummer, are you implying certain things, or I'm just trying to get, because you're working with 4 limbs here that are doing things independently. Yes. Well, certainly I kind of do both, in the sense that I both kind of imply times, and also sometimes I kind of solo over certain ostinatos. So, for example, I had 2 years ago another thankfully and luckily very successful solo recording on Drum Channel, which is based in LA, and it's founded by Don Lombardi, who's the owner of Drum Workshop. Great drum company.
And a wonderful person, Don. He really likes my playing, and he's been extra supportive towards me and also towards my drums and percussion band, Thunder Duo, and he's invited us as a duo. Previously, he's invited me as a solo artist. So I recorded there a drum solo, which is called Alexander Hedgehog. It's also available on YouTube, where I'm playing a 7/8 time on the left foot, by playing a cowbell with a single bass drum pedal, and sometimes I solo over the 7/8 ostinato in 7/8, and sometimes I solo over in 4/4. So that's another approach to it, to kind of have a one limb as a kind of timekeeper in the sense, or completely ignore that and just feel the pulse, and sometimes just kind of imply the time as you pointed out, or as you named it. It's both possible, so absolutely possible. Everything is possible in music. That's the beauty of the whole thing. I think that you're not only allowed, but you're required to be yourself on the instrument, because nobody really wants to listen to copies and clones of anybody, although there are, of course, very, very influential players, and it's easy to fall into the trap of kind of trying to over copy anybody. So I think the most important thing is to kind of find a balance of stealing the information, because we're all just thieves, almost everything's been played already.
It's just been remixed in one way or the other.
Yes, but you're just kind of stealing elements or ideas, and you come up with something completely different.
Yeah. You're from Hungary originally, and so the great composer there was Dvorak. That was the composer.
No, I think he was Polish. Yeah, he was Polish. We had Béla Bartók.
Bartók, sorry, and Bartók was using folk tunes.
Absolutely.
So he was reinterpreting.
Yeah, absolutely, and also Zoltán Kodály, and we had Franz Liszt, also Hungarian. So fantastic composers, and they were also very, very individual and very what's the word for that? Like extremely moving for their times. They always been very, very creative, extremely moving, and individual in their styles. And without wanting to be big-headed by any means, I think I've got that sort of kind of thinking in my head that I've always been brave enough to come up with my own ideas without trying to copy anybody. And it's probably just in our heads, or the way our brains kind of being linked, or I really don't know what's the secret behind that. But there's another thing which I've learned. I read very, very recently, that music experts made a huge research, and they found that the extraordinary speciality behind Bartók's playing was the complexity of the language we speak. Because I don't know if you heard of it, but Hungarian is the second most complicated language in the world. So it's coming from the certain kind of approach to the language and the way our brain kind of operates.
So almost, that they say, like, people like Frank Sinatra, the reason he sang like he sang was because his timing came from the way that he spoke, because it came from like a New York kind of Italian way, which has a certain kind of swagger to it. It has a certain kind of feel. Whereas if you were to go and, for example, go to New Orleans, for example, the musicians there have a different kind of feel. Or if you go to South Africa, they have a slightly different kind of feel. So what you're talking about there is both language and also the way that the kind of feel of the language as well, not just the actual words.
Absolutely, totally. I can easily imagine that's the case. And also, just as you mentioned, Frank Sinatra's timing is totally unbelievable. The way he kind of puts those words and the way he sings, that sort of leisureness, that sort of coolness is just unbelievable. And I'm pretty sure, if you think about it, all music and vocals and playing, it's coming from your heart, it's coming from your soul. So you are the person who's doing it. So it's gonna be in the way how you feel, how you represent yourself, how you breathe, how you talk, how you behave. So these things massively belong, I believe. And also the timing you mentioned about the New Orleans music is fantastic, because I've recently written a drum course where we broke down the great New Orleans grooves and New Orleans elements. And that sort of timing they play with is kind of, they call it between the cracks.
Yeah.
when you're not kind of in the straight field, neither in the swung field. You're kind of somewhere in between, and there's great drummers and great musicians playing that field, and they just feel it that way. So it's coming from their soul, coming from their heart. This is why it's extremely important and extremely difficult as well to learn it for someone like ourselves.
And tell us about a time when you've worked on a creative project, whether it's a solo or maybe it was a teaching thing you were doing or a recording. Something you worked on and you gave it your heart and your soul. You gave it all, but for whatever reason, it didn't work out like you'd hoped. And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took away from that experience?
Yeah, I think it's again a very good question, and it happens to all of us. And we just learn ourselves, I think, that what kind of people we are, what kind of sort of workers we are, in the sense that very often, these things, when you give your heart and soul, but also there's someone who's asking you to do that. So there's again a business deal behind that, and you have to meet the deadlines. And they're going to have a certain imagination, how they imagining you to do certain things, and you have a certain belief that you think, this is how it has to be, or this is how it should be, at least, because I'm a very flexible person, so I always try to avoid any sort of conflict situations. So I'm trying to agree with everybody all the time, but probably that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm just trying. Yeah, but as they say, the best key to failure is trying to please everybody. So I might fall into that trap. But what I want to say is, so you meet certain expectations, and you have to learn yourself whether you're going to be able to deliver in time, and how much is the amount of work that you can take on. And this is mainly what I learned from it, because I was struggling to kind of deliver the material, because I'm a slow writer. I've got a lot of ideas, but I'm probably overthinking a lot of things, in the sense that I really want to make sure that the students are getting to a very high level, but also they start from a very accessible level. So I want them to go through a long journey, and very often you don't have the time for that, because back in the day, people were learning these crafts throughout decades, and starting from an early age, and going through their teenage years, and then early working years, and they're just doing it, and they become professionals by 35 or 40. Now the kids coming to the college at the age of 16, 17, and they expect to be a professional functioning players who make a living by the time they're 19. And that's very often not the case, because they forget to put the time into this, and they don't necessarily have the necessary background information. So that's a very complex question, but what I learned from it is knowing what to commit to and how much is that I can take on.
And on this journey, this creative journey you've had as a drummer and a musician, tell us about any insights or any kind of light bulb moments where you've kind of gone, okay, this is maybe the direction I need to go with my music, or this is maybe the decision I need to make in terms of how I spend my time, the kind of things that I focus on.
Oh man, you've got such a good questions. You're literally reading my mind. Honestly. These are great questions, because that was my first of all, when I found this sort of percussive solistic drumming and a lot of percussion elements to my playing. That was, I think, my light bulb moment, as you put it, musically. And I was practicing that. I really enjoyed doing that, and I immediately felt that kind of my sort of approach and playing was noticed by certain people who were in charge at the time, and I got the national radio big band job in Budapest, which was a top job. It's like someone playing in a BBC big band, in England. So that sort of level that was, we did a lot of recordings for Walt Disney and all the, top Hungarian pop rock music. We always on the radio and Friday nights on the telly. So I was really accomplished in Hungary and in Budapest in my years, but I was 29 at the time, which is coming up to 10 years ago almost, unfortunately, because time flies. And then I had this kind of realization, and that's the answer for the second part of your question, that so what now? I kind of had the feeling that, okay, I can practice in my rehearsal studio or garage or whatever that was at the time for the rest of my life, and I can think that I am the best drummer in the world, or maybe even other people can think that I'm the best drummer in the world. But what's going to happen if nobody knows that? So I realized that I have to find a platform for my playing, and I have to find a bigger market, because I've already played, by the age of 29, I already played on every single jazz festival, every drum festival, every album, all the theater shows, radio orchestra, Walt Disney, everything. I've done it all pretty much in Hungary, and I knew that from this point, I'm only going to go further down, because there was no way up. And I had to realize that I need to relocate. I need to relocate to either London or the States, but because I found it's significantly more difficult to go to, say, LA or New York. First of all, I didn't know anybody. Not that I knew anybody here in London, but I absolutely had no connections in America, and also the visa problems and everything. So it would have been so much more difficult that I thought. And I always loved London, from the films and from the buildings and the whole history in England. And so I had a huge attraction to come to London, because many people ask me, why didn't you come to the States? And I just feel like, wow, I'm feeling home. I'm at home here.
I think London as well is always a good stepping stone because it has that mixture of being in Europe, but also having a way of looking at things which is probably more similar to North America. And so you often find, whether it's in photography, I know a lot of it, photographers from Italy that come to London first and then make their stepping stone to New York, or musicians that come to London first and then from other parts of Europe and then move to LA or to New York. I mean, we mentioned like people like Thomas Lang, who moved from Austria to London and then London to LA.
Exactly. So that might as well be the case with me. I don't know at the moment, but So that was my second realization, that I needed to find a bigger market for my playing, and also from here, the international media very often approach me, and very soon they found me. I was very lucky in the sense that I got this big gig fairly soon, like a year after I arrived in London. I got the Thriller Live World Tour, which is the Michael Jackson show from the West End. And I was a drummer on that tour for 3 years, traveled the world, from China to South Africa, all over Europe, Scandinavia, Italy, Greece, of course, a lot of UK tours, Germany tours. So, and during those touring years, I made sure to get in contact with all the local magazines. For example, I had a big feature in Italy and another one in Germany. Of course, a UK #1 magazine, Rhythm magazine, featured me. That was my first big feature. And so I basically, on the back of that gig, I started creating my media appearances and my own luck by having a gig. So I had, people had something to connect me with or connect me to. And I just started kind of getting in touch with these magazines. And also, of course, I had several videos and everything I sent them. So they realized that, okay, this guy can probably play a little bit. And also he's got this gig. Why not feature him? So I started kind of creating my own luck.
But I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that, listening to this just now, who they're in that position where they maybe don't live in the main cities for whatever their thing is. So they're a designer, but they live in a part that's not Milan or Paris or New York or London, or they're a musician. They don't live in some of those places. So talk to us about the actual process of moving from not just a city, but from a country to the other end of Europe, where you don't know anyone. You don't really have any contacts. You're coming at it fresh. You have no network, no name. How? Because that's a really scary thing. I know there's a lot of our listeners that are probably in that position where they're thinking about making a big move like that to somewhere, but there's something in there. They're afraid. There's a fear there as well. How did you deal with it? How did you deal with kind of maybe getting over any kind of fear and building your network once you were in that new place?
Well, that's a very tricky thing, to be honest with you. I'm not going to lie. And the first year was an absolute nightmare. I mean, in the sense that basically you're starting out from scratch again, like completely.
Yeah.
And I literally had one friend in London who wasn't. I mean, he was one of my former student from Hungary. So he had no connections at all. He just went out to these clubs, Ronnie Scott's or something, and he thought that, wow, Gabor plays so much better than the guys who play there that he really should be here. That was basically, that was his opinion. And he kept saying to me that you really have to come out and you have to try because you are going to succeed. And he kept saying that to me for 3 years. So it wasn't a sudden decision because, of course, once you build up a network in your home country throughout a life worth of work, and your whole childhood and teenage years and young working years are going into building your own profile in your home country, then you feel like you really have something to risk when you leave it behind. And I can't deny there's a risk, but if you don't risk, you're not going to win. So I just thought, okay, I can always go back where I was, in Hungary if I fail. So, and if I'm not going right now, then I'm probably never going to go. And I felt like I owe myself a chance to try, and it worked out. So it wasn't easy, but it worked out. And I know that if I had not tried, I would always have this feeling that I really should have tried, and I'm worthy of more. I'm more talented, and my music and my message myself has to reach out to more people, and I could not possibly do that from my home country. So,
but what kept you going like that in month 9 of being in London, and it's a struggle, and you're trying to get into the scene, and it's hard, and it's expensive as well in London. What kept you going?
Well, I just saw the signs from the early stage that there is a chance, and there is my talent is good enough to stand out. Because what happened was, first of all, I could only afford to live kind of outside the M25, which is a massive ring. It's how long is it? Maybe 120 miles or something around London. So I was living outside of the M25 because that was the only thing I could afford, because London is crazy expensive. But from there, I drove into town every single day. Normally, I spent 2.5 to 3 hours per day in the car. I spent everything on petrol because the petrol is very expensive as well. And I drove into town, and I went to every single jam session that I can find. And basically, from one place, people kind of directed me to the other one. That, there's a jam session on Tuesday, come down to Hoxton Street or whatever. And then there's another one at Bar Music Hall, and then one at the Ephra in Brixton. And you kind of start getting to know the people, because very often, similar faces kind of show up at these places. And my luck was that normally, professional musicians, like really good, working professionals where I wanted to belong, they don't really go to jam sessions anymore because they don't need to advertise themselves. They either grown up in London or being on the scene for years, so they don't really go up and jam just for fun because they're happy to be at home when they're not working. So basically, me as a professional who's coming from a professional background, I always kind of stood out in the sense that I was just simply better than the others because the others were amateur drummers. And therefore, kind of people always wanted to play with me. They wanted me to sit with their band, and then they asked for my mobile number, and then they asked for my email address. And in a couple of months' time, I just found myself that the phone was ringing, and people started booking me for gigs. And then when 6 months gone, I think, then I had my first residency gig, which basically came from a friend, a saxophone player girl, who had the same feeling that she just kind of felt like I can play pretty much all styles. So I was well prepared, of course, and she just wanted me to be in the house band. So from that point, there was a turning point in a sense that it wasn't me anymore who's knocking on the door to let me play a song or two. It was people knocking on my door and asking me to...
What your gig?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and from then, and the whole Thriller gig is pretty much came from a jam session in London. So, I mean, it's totally unbelievable. And if someone would tell me, I mean, even just now, nearly 10 years later, I probably wouldn't be brave enough to do this, to make the same step. But back then, I just thought, okay, this is my time. And also, our job at the National Radio Orchestra was cancelled. It was stopped. from the radio management. So I just thought, okay, this is the time. That's the sign for me that from this moment, my career is not going to go up in Hungary. It's only going to go down, or in the best possible option was that I'm going to keep repeating myself, and I playing at the same festival for less and less people, and I just thought that that's not enough. I wanted more. I was hungry for the success, so I made this step, which I never regretted. So this is how I kind of built this up, and the Thriller gig came from the back of a jam session, and I did that for 3 years. Of course, I kind of fell out of the scene a little bit because if you're away, people stop booking you because they know that you're not around. But then through internet connections and a couple of recommendations, I started working with Andy Whitmore, who is a great pop producer. He worked with Soul to Soul and Danny Minogue and did Eternal and a lot of stuff in the 80s, 90s, and he runs the studio. So he started booking me for his pop sessions, which I'm still doing occasionally when he needs me. And so this is how that kind of whole thing worked. And once I had the Thriller reference, I started dapping, being like a substitute drummer on Rock of Ages, which was another big West End show. And so from there, again, you get to know new people, and this is how the whole thing kind of builds and rolls.
And what's the best advice that you've ever received about making it in music, making a living and making a career from music?
What's the best advice I ever received?
Yeah. What advice have you received from others that you kind of remember, either around the playing side of things, how to be your best as a drummer and a musician, or maybe it's on the business side, how to ensure that you can actually have a career as a player?
Well, probably I would think that the most important thing, or the best advice really has been from my private teacher, who told me that I need to be versatile. Because if I'm versatile, of course, I'm doubling or tripling the amount of work I can actually cover. So basically, if a jazz trio want to play super quietly in a corner of a jazz cafe, and I have to play brushes all night, I can do that. But I've at the same time I've also been booked for thrash metal drum sessions where a band from South Africa been let down by the drummers, and they had a producer booked from Napalm Death, which is one of the biggest death metal bands. So my scale kind of goes from playing pop rock and jazz and metal and odd times and all the extremes really, styles. And I think that sort of versatility gives you the confidence to take on any jobs. And of course, you need to be a good reader. So basically, in one word, learn your craft. Yeah. So once you feel like you're as good as you can be, which you're probably never going to feel, because you always feel like, I could be better. And this is how I feel. I'm always improving. But the most important thing is learn your craft, and then learn how to market yourself and how to be on the scene. Put yourself out there. Go out there and make your connections. Collect all the email addresses and phone numbers and everything, because I can guarantee that no one's going to knock on your door and offer you, a worldwide record deal or a world tour or whatever without knowing that you are actually capable to cover. And I think that goes for every sort of jobs and every professionals. It's not only for music. So basically, you have to be good and confident and reliable, and if possible, individual as well. Because I think after a while, people going to spot that, wow, this guy is doing something differently.
And do you have an online resource or a tool like Evernote or Google Docs or something that you like and you kind of rely on?
For like self-management or
for management, and also for one of the things I hear a lot from a lot of drummers who use quite a lot of apps as well, kind of metronome apps and different things on their mobile phone, as well as just having stuff on the computer.
Yes. Well, I'm in the process of creating a whole new website where I'm pretty much advertising my activities, which goes down to both kind of selling my CDs, DVDs, signature packs, signature drumstick, and also my performances and clinics, which I do, like Skype lessons, and I'm offering online tutorials, and I'm offering private lessons and drum clinics and festival appearances. So the online presence is extremely important. I've not created my own apps in the sense that it's being done by professional companies, like for example Hudson Music. Created their own drum app called Drum Guru, which is one of the leading apps, and I will rather try and use their reach, and create my own kind of app through them, because I think it's much easier to set that up than if you try to create something like totally individual on your own back. I think it's just like having a record label behind you, who's always going to have a bigger reach and a bigger following than if you try to kind of launch something totally individual.
And if you could recommend just one record and one book to our listeners, what would they be?
Only one?
Only one.
Wow. Well, then I would probably my all-time favorite album is a Latin American piano player by the name of Michel Camilo, who is totally fantastic, and he has a big band album out called One More Once. That's probably one of my all-time favorite albums. Of course, I could mention Billy Cobham and several other huge influences, but probably that's my favorite album called One More Once by Michel Camilo. And if you want to learn to play the drums properly, then probably Joe Morello's Master Studies. That would be the book that I would certainly recommend, because he goes down to insane hand technique and the proper foundation behind the instrument that we use till nowadays, even though it was written probably in the early 80s or late 70s probably. So those are the two, my favorites.
Great. And we'll put, if our listeners, if they go to jamestaylor.me and if they put in Gabor in the search bar, they'll be able to get all the links for these as well. So final question for you, Gabor. Let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch again. So all you have is you've got your kit and the knowledge that you've acquired over your years of music, but no one knows who you are. No, you don't have any contacts, and your name isn't known. How would you restart things?
Wow, I really hope it's not going to happen. I really hope it's not going to happen, because it's very, very tiring. So it's of course it takes a lot out of you, and also you kind of have to rethink certain things, whether you feel the energy in you that you're able to kind of restart and rebuild all your connections. So that's a good question first, and because I think everybody can. You can only do it a couple of times in your life, so probably not too many times. But that would be the case if I say, for example, if I was to move to New York or LA or something, that would be the case. What would I do, or how would I feel? That's a very good question. It would be different now, in the sense that, of course, I have a lot of references behind me, so I would probably try to build on those things.
But what if you couldn't do that? What if you were... And the reason I ask this question, I ask it to all of our guests, is because I want them to, often the way that they started and they got going. I mean, you mentioned coming to London and just going out there and playing all these, jam sessions and kind of getting known. And that could work, and it could still work, but maybe there's something else that you would suggest to someone now if you were to have to do it all again, or you were suggesting to a young drummer or a young musician how to get started. What do you think it might be?
Well, I honestly don't know the answer. What would I say? Well, first of all, just as I pointed out before, learn your craft to the maximum, and basically try to reach out to the most amount of people, because very often the jobs and the pretty much who's going to hire you to do your work is not necessarily down to how good you are. it's very much down to the connections, because who's going to book someone who they never heard of and never seen? So build your connections in the business. Now it's just as hard as practicing or being as good as you can be, because it can be a drag, a massive drag. It takes a lot of time. It's just as demanding and difficult than actually practicing or working on your craft. So very often you can jump certain obstacles if you have the right connections. So I think knowing the right people is just as important as knowing your own craft. So I would, if I had to restart, I would certainly, or if I had to give an advice to young players or young professionals how to make it, then probably that would be the quickest. I mean, it's never a quick thing, but that would be probably the most successful approach. I would try to recommend them to learn their craft and build the connections at the same time.
Great. Well, Gabor, thank you so much for coming on the show. And finally, share the best ways that listeners can connect with you, learn more about what you're up to.
Well, they can always connect me on my website, which is gabordornyei.com. I, of course, also have an artist page on Facebook, which is facebook.com/Dornyei Drums. I also have an Instagram account, which I hardly ever had the time to update, but I certainly will get into the swing of that. What else I've got? They can follow me on Twitter, Gabor Dornyei Drums. And that's pretty much it. And we always try to kind of post all our dates and posters and everything on the Facebook and the website page. I'm also going to have a brand new website. We're working on it currently. So it's very easy to find me online. And I'm really looking forward to hear from everybody and get in touch and spread the word. And just type in my name on YouTube and you can find a lot of my work from all my DVDs. I have 3 DVDs out at the moment. One is my solo project, Gabor Dornyei Drums, Music and Friends. The second one is from my band, Thunder Duo, which is Thunder Duo with Dom Famularo. We had this great American star guest on our DVD. And the third one is my duo DVD with Pete Lockett, who is an absolute brilliant percussionist with Peter Gabriel and Bjork, and he played with fantastic artists. So our duo project is called Rhythm Frontier.
Great. And I'll put all the links there on the show notes. People go there to jamestaylor.me and just type in Gabor. You'll be able to find all the links for all of these things that have been mentioned. So, Gabor, thank you so much for coming on the show. I look forward to hearing you play live at some point as well. And I wish you all the continued success as your career goes from strength to strength.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, James.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me